So if we look at, again, the general fund revenues and expenditures for this current fiscal year, what we're in right now. Let's see. We go back to our pie charts. I really want to talk about the three larger pieces of this pie. We've mentioned it before. You see with the red, the largest source, this is looking at the revenues, where the money comes from, is out of sales tax. So that's by far our largest. So again, when Andy was talking about the decline in sales tax that fell so dramatically previously, it was a huge hit because it was the #1 source of funding. And then we look over here to this blue, kind of bluish piece here. This is the motor vehicle license fee. These are monies that come through a convoluted formula and process from the state of California based on the collection of the sale of vehicles and also the ongoing vehicle licensing every year. You know, when you license your vehicle and you have to do all that, there's a share of those revenues that come to cities. So in our case, it's actually 15% of our general fund revenues. And then actually the third one is property tax. So as we talked before, that seems to be the place where we struggle compared to other cities in providing general services. One of the key things though is we have seen several things happen with the state over the years. They changed the formulas at different times for how much sales tax will come to the city. They had this last budget, there were major changes in the vehicle license fees that came to new cities. And if you remember, there was quite a bit of legislative effort because they were taking 30% of the revenues from the newest cities in the state by controlling these revenues. So these are when we talk about some of our vulnerabilities, when we look forward on revenues, we don't have control over all of that. You know, the state, when they're balancing their budget, they make changes. So those are our three largest, and then you can kind of see the other three, the other pieces. And so then where do we spend it? So that's where we get it from. The largest one, sales tax, motor vehicle license fees, and property taxes. And then this is where we spend it, and this is in the current budget. And again, top here's police protection. That's through the sheriff's contract, as well as the support, general fund, other general fund services that support that. Fire and emergency medical services. And then we break into the different smaller pieces as we go through. And this is the way the budget is set up, so that's why it's broken into those pieces. But after fire, here, we kind of go over, make sure I'm getting my colors right, this kind of salmon color. So the next one on the services side is recreation, parks, and building maintenance. So that's the third budget where we spend money. And you've seen these, we do these every year as part of the budget process. So we talked about where it comes from, where we spend it, and then one of the other things we get asked a lot about is property and sales tax revenue, and how does that come into the city? How much of what you pay in sales tax, or how much of what you pay in property tax, comes back to the city of Norco? So the first pie chart is sales tax, state sales tax. And Andy, I'm going to pass this one over to you to run through.
You know, maybe just grab that microphone right there.
That would be like way too efficient. Sorry. Is it on?
Okay.
It's on.
It's on. All right. For every dollar of sales tax that is generated in the city of Norco, the way it's split is that 68.5 cents of that goes to the state's general fund. Okay. The next biggest share there goes to public safety services. I'm sorry, the second one in here goes to the city's general fund. City's general fund, we get 11 cents out of a dollar, 11.5 cents approximately. And then we have a portion that goes to transportation. This is the Measure A, approximately 6 cents. Some of that money comes back to the city through the Riverside County Transportation Commission. This is a local piece of it, which is then divided among cities in Riverside counties. There are some of it, about 3 cents going to state transportation fund for transportation services. And again, some of that might come back to the city on an annual allocation basis for transportation projects. Again, the emphasis here is that we do get our good share of sales tax, but not every dollar that is of sales tax generated in Norco doesn't remain in Norco. We only get about 11 cents out of a dollar.
The next one, again, if we switch to property tax, and the key with this is, again, this is the slice of your property tax dollar that comes to the general fund of the city of Norco. These over here go immediately, they don't come to us at all, they go to other taxing entities. And those are special districts, school districts, some of the county special districts. So that money goes directly to other entities. This green part, now we could do a 4-hour presentation just on this green piece. We're not going to, but I wanted to at least point out, this is the section of the property tax dollar that went to the former RDA. Now, given all of the things that have happened in the state of California, the dissolving of the RDA, at this point in time, we no longer have any access to that money. There are still other entities that could get pieces of it. The goal is to use this money to unwind the RDA, pay off all of the infrastructure, the bonds, the money that was taken out for infrastructure projects. We no longer have the access to that. The job now is to unwind the RDA and hopefully pay off those bonds, as quickly as can be. But those are more than 20-year payment schedules. So even by paying them off, I might even be longer. I'm not sure, Andy, but I know it's a good 20 years on those bonds. So at this point in time, this is what we have to count on out of your property tax dollar. And again, just a lot of this, as you can see, is just to put some perspective. We talk about our two of the traditional local government revenue sources, sales tax and property tax. So, and then we talk about the two traditional local government services, police and fire services, okay? So if we look back, now I do apologize, the charts aren't exactly to scale with each other, so I do apologize with that. So if we look back, again, 07, 08, the blue, it was the amount of sales tax that we got. That was 5.3 million. The green was property tax that we got, that was 1.6. Now at that year, we spent on fire a little over 5 million, and on sheriff, 5.3. So even back then, those two traditional property, local revenues didn't pay for even the two basic public services that the local governments provide. So if we look over here, this is this current year, or actually it's 2011, 2012. Even though this has been reduced and this has been reduced, we still don't have that balance of those traditional property and sales taxes paying for even the basic law enforcement and fire services. Andy, was there anything else on that chart? Okay. So what have we been doing? We have this. I'm going to run through some of these. These are things that some of you have seen at previous meetings, and we go kind of run through a lot of this each budget year. So this is really a summary. But over the last 5 years, the city has been reducing consistently the general fund expenditures. Went from 17.1 million in 07-08, and we're expecting to 13 million as we finish this year. So that's overall a 25% reduction from during that time frame. We looked at this year, when we passed the budget we're in now, when we brought it to the City Council last year, it was essentially balanced. I mean, so a lot of that cutting, a lot of that expenditure reduction was paying off. But we did have to use some one-time deferrals. So the difference was, the difference in the budget that we adopted back in June, and now is the loss of the RDA funds. So now we're trying to accommodate that in the new budget process. So again, when we go through these, we will have some copies, as you leave today for this, and we will put some information on our website. But if we look back and just start looking back through the years, what has been done under expenditure reductions? And these are just a snapshot, folks. It's not line item by line item, but in the area of public safety, we reduced, back in 08-09, reduced code enforcement funding. Then you can kind of walk through, as you see, elimination of motor officers, reduced fire personnel from 28 to 18. That was the City of Norco Fire Department. And then in 11-12, again, traffic officers, community service officers, and then contracted out fire and EMS, which again, those are all things that reduced our expenditures. When we look into the general city services, we've reduced full-time staffing for general city services from 77 full-time employees to 50. There haven't been any negotiated pay raises since 05-06 for the general employees. Furloughs, 36-hour work week, Norco did that before anybody knew it was fashionable. So those are things that have been in place for a while. We've implemented cost reduction changes to pension benefits by increasing employee contributions, and we've done cost reduction changes to employee and retiree health care, again, by increasing the employee contributions. Also implemented an alternative to Social Security for part-time employees, because that was another cost that we were able to find another option for. Those of you that have been around know that we contracted out city engineering function, which reduced the hours and the costs of that function. Contracted out custodial services to all our city facilities, but we also reduced the service level when we did that and the costs. And then generally reorganized, reduced, and consolidated different city functions. We had sought and obtained grant funding to help and supplement senior citizen programs. That was critical because, again, when you have shrinking general fund revenues, those grant sources, especially for really key programs, were important. And then also some one-time expenditure deferrals. And this is where we talk about one-time measures for ongoing costs, is that structural imbalance. We did take one-time, deferrals, or we didn't contribute to vehicle maintenance maybe one year to save that money instead of doing it every year. Equipment replacements, those types of things. So those are, again, measures that we've had to do and look at each year. So again, we have this also in a pie chart for those of you who don't like the chart. We give this one. Oh, okay, give that one over to Andy.
All right, what we wanted to do here is take a preview of the next coming year's general fund budget. And we are doing that by comparing this coming year's budget with what we have this current year. On the revenue side, again, we've listed the categories of revenues that comes into the general fund. As we've discussed before, property tax for this year compared to next year, we're not seeing any significant change in that. The 19,000 is almost inconsequential. The value of property in the city of Norco, based on information we get from our property tax consultant, that valuation has not changed. It's not expected to change from this year to next year. As a result of that, the revenue amount remains flat. Sales tax, we continue to make progress from the $3.1 million we were about 3 years ago to now. That amount has gone up. We are projecting $4.3 million for the next fiscal year, and this current fiscal year for $4.2 million. That is a change of about 100,000, nearly 85,000 to be exact, and that represents about 2-3% increase. There are other items on the revenue side that are showing some changes. Includes charges for services. These are revenues that come in when people come in to pay for things they use. This is, you take a building permit, for example, or you go and do parks and recs programs. You pay for those services. One of the reasons this revenue is projected to decline for next fiscal year is as part of this budget, we've actually planned on closing the aquatics program. And when you close that, you reduce expenditures, but it also has some revenue impact. The revenue impact associated with that is part of this projected decrease here. Similarly, in planning as well as in engineering, we are also looking to receive slightly less revenue next fiscal year than we are projecting for this fiscal year. One item here that is projected to go up is lease income, and is projected to go up by $157,000. That is related to the Civil X property. This fiscal year, we received about 6 months worth of rent from the Civil X property. Next year, we are looking to get a full year's worth of revenue. So that is why you see that $157,000 change for next fiscal year. Similarly, on the expenditure side, I think the city manager has already pointed out the fact that this current year's budget was essentially balanced when we did the budget. I think the difference between our expected revenue this year and our expected expenditures were about $200,000 gap. Next year, that gap is growing. And the reason that gap is growing is because of the elimination of the redevelopment agency. If you look across the board, police services, obviously, that has nothing to do with the elimination of the redevelopment agency. A contract we have with the county, there is a cost of living increases on those contracts every year. The county determines that at the end of each fiscal year. But we have to put some estimate in the budget to account for that. And we have put in here about 3% projected increase on that county contract for next year, and that is the $104,000 that you're looking at. Slight increase there on the EMS, Fire and Emergency Medical Services. The contract we have with them covers 18-month period. This is a preliminary number that we have been provided. We believe that number will go down. It's the worst case scenario that they give us those numbers. Ultimately, they charge us based on actual expenditures that they spend. The rest of it, non-departmental, you see that going up by $500,000, and we've talked about deferring expenditures to future periods. Last year, there were 2 items in this next year's budget that were not in last year's budget. Namely, there is $400,000 that is proposed to be contributed to post-retirement health care funding. Last year, that item was not put in the budget. If we include that in next year's budget, that's $400,000 that will be in next year's budget that is not in this current year's budget. The other item is $100,000, which again we put in to fund for equipment replacement. That item was not done last year. If we put it in next year's budget, that will add another $100,000 to next year's budget. Again, the rest of the expenditures that you see there, which are, for example, fiscal and support services, the city attorney, city council, city manager, and city clerk, all those are due to the impact of the elimination of the RDF. There are administrative costs, which previously we split it and charged some of it out to the redevelopment agency. That funding is no longer available moving towards next year's budget. So we are not, we now have to shift those costs back to the general fund.
And then these are the same information, only in pie chart form. Again, the same 3 largest pieces on revenues, and we expect the same largest pieces on the expenditures. Okay, so kind of to summarize this section, what are the fiscal challenges that we're facing? Andy talked about that we have this, looking at the budget for July 1st, it's $1.4 million is what our budget deficit is. That's the number that we have to find a way to take care of for July 1. Okay? And just basically, our revenues aren't sufficient for the current level of expenditures. So that's the task. That's what we're doing as we're working through a budget proposal. $1 million of that structural imbalance was from the elimination of the redevelopment agency. Those, again, are now things that we have to figure out, what do we do with those, that level of service that was provided there. And then also, we're going to continue to be vulnerable to the state takeaways. So that's just kind of the nutshell of our challenges. And he also talked about that we do have a fund balance, the 1.8 million, but again, that is something that is used to balance cash flows. We don't get our money in even increments every month, but we still have the bills to pay every month. And so at this point, we need to have something in there, some kind of fund balance, rather than allocating and spending every single dollar to cover our cash flows, to make up for the timing on our revenues. And then the other key thing that with the loss of, on the capital improvement now, I talked about the general fund, and I said that one piece was the capital improvement programs, and those are the development of infrastructure, maintenance of infrastructure, and that is a big hit with the loss of the redevelopment agency. So again, when we're looking at the general fund, we have to be looking at how are we going to get those capital improvement programs funded as we move forward. So again, just to kind of look at this, this number, you know, how do we, you know, it's just, you know, we all do budgets, you know, we're looking at how do we make this work. And so just the basics are that, you know, we can balance the budget for July 1st. We use a combination of expenditure reductions, we continue to defer some things, and we could use some reserves from what's called the Special Asset Revenue Fund. This is a fund that the City Council had set up in previous years. And this is whenever, if there was a sale of property, rather than that money going in and just being respent and set into the general budgets, it was put into this revenue fund. So we do have, there's about 1.4 million in that fund. Now the purpose of that fund though, was that it wouldn't be spent. It was to be that backup fund for the city. And that was a prudent thing, you know, and it's important to have those aspects there. But it is there, it is something that is available to the council. Or the other option, you can just implement the cuts and the deferrals. And we can do that. We've, that would be the other option of where we would go. So I wanted to talk about some of the things we would need just to show you what this 1.3, just about almost 1.4 million estimated shortfall means. Now these are not proposals, okay? This is just to give you a sense of what dollar amounts are attached to some of these services. But again, to get to that 1.3, what's an example of how to get there? This 300,000, again, that would be another deferral. That's money towards the cost of current retirees in retiree health care. Again, when the city made some prudent decisions a few years back and made a large contribution to pay towards that. So we have that, we have the interest on that, but we've been deferring this for a couple of years now. So at some point, you know, we're going to have to deal with that down the road. But if we were to do that again, just say, okay, we're going to defer that again. This 100,000, that's defer contributing any more to the equipment replacement fund. That actually is something we feel we could do this year. We had some savings on equipment replacement monies with the contracting out of the fire department. So that's one thing. But still, that only gets us to $400,000. So that, just to give you a sense of what that means in our budget. The sheriff's substation, the cost of having that substation here is $530,000. So that's one large ticket item. So this is where we talk about what are our priorities as a community. And that's really what budgeting needs to do. It has to reflect the priorities of the community. So if that's, it remains the priority of having that substation here, we would still have the sheriff's contract. They just would not be operating out of a substation here in Norco at City Hall. And then if we do all those things, I'm going to skip down to this 150,000. There will be some revenue that will come to us for the winding down of the RDA. to help offset some of, there's an awful lot of finance and records, and it just is a whole bunch of functions that we still have to do as part of that. But we don't get that money directly. There is an allocation formula, and so we're looking at possibly we would have 150,000. That number could change, but we're looking at, we could add that into next year's budget and feel safe, you know, that that would be pretty realistic. So if we do all those things, that leaves just about $300,000, which would have to come out of general staffing reductions and changes. So if we remember all those things we've done, all the cutting we've done in the general services, this would be another, you know, we have the 50 employees, about 14 of them are affiliated with the water and sewer and some of the other types of funds. They're funded, not just general fund. So out of the remaining, we would need to make some cuts and changes. And so if you look at, you know, benefits, salaries, all of that, that would be another, that would equate to, again, these are not proposals, these are not necessarily recommendations, but it's to give some context. That would be another 4 full-time employees plus some significant part-time, number of part-time employees. But this is just an example of the types of things that we're grappling with as far as how do we make the cuts to make that and balance it for next year. So what does that mean if we did any of those? And again, this is a lot of what it means. It's, we look through public safety. These are other things that would happen if we were to not have a substation here. So again, it's just putting together, you know, how those would go. Get the savings here locally, and then it would still operate, but out of the Harupa station. But these are the cuts that would come. We wouldn't have dedicated sergeants. We wouldn't have a dedicated lieutenant. That's something Norco enjoys right now under our current scenarios. And then also it would affect patrol hours, the distances to responses. All the, you know, this isn't, you know, rocket science. These are all things that if you don't have a substation here and they're coming from Harupa, there's going to be impacts. And then also on the city side, if we were to implement that level of additional cuts, we would just have to change the way we do business, the way we deliver services. You would see more appointments. Now, you know, last year we had to reduce the hours of our public counters where people could just walk up. With these cuts, it would be even more severe, a lot more appointment types of processes, which again are all delivery models that we would need to look at. And then again, some of the others here. The aquatics program, if those of you that were part of our budget process last year, this was one of the things that we had talked about last year, was the closing of the pool and the discontinuation of the aquatics programs. These budget numbers, we were able to get through last year without doing that, but these budget numbers going into the new year do include closing of that program and of the pool. There would be, you know, maintenance of medians. There's all the types of things that are on the general operations side. We would have some difference, you know, response to emergency calls and animal control. These are the services we provide. So those are the services, you know, that get cut when you don't have the resources. So after all of that, this is really one slide to kind of, again, summarize as we look forward. We have a couple of things. We talked about the immediate problem with next year's budget, the 1.4 million. But we also have a problem here in that we don't have the money for capital improvements either. So as we're looking ahead, we need to also be saying, how are we going to take care of, you know, the creation, the maintenance and infrastructure needs that we're going to have in the city, again, after losing those other revenues. So if we looked at it and said, if we wanted to sustain, okay, know that we've got some money for capital improvements, kind of sustain the funding levels we have now, you know, before the cuts. This is kind of how Andy has put it together here, that we would need 2.4 million annually in new revenues. Now, looking ahead, we have some things here in Norco that other cities don't have. we do have some things on the horizon. As I said, we have the ability to expand sales tax. We have a regional driver with Silver Lakes coming in. It's not the Silver Lakes itself, but it's the people it brings in to, again, spend money here, and that will help us with our sales tax, with our transient occupancy tax for hotels. But those things are not going to be, we're not going to see them in our revenues in the short term. So we really are trying to look at what services and what service levels does the community want in the short term, as we position ourselves for those opportunities that are in the future. We continue our economic development, attraction, and retention. And just for an example, we do have, now that we have the numbers with the Silver Lakes coming in, we have hotel developers, right? And so they've been waiting, and they keep coming in, and they're actively here. But let's say even if they bought the property today, went through, designed it, had to do whatever to build it, and then finally get it operating, it could be a 2-year process, okay? And then they have to operate for a while to collect the money before the transient occupancy tax comes back to us. So we've got this, we have these opportunities out there, but it's keeping hold of the short term. And what level of community and service do we want in that short term? And so then the other part of the fiscal sustainability, we use the term identify new revenue measures to be in place for multi-years. And I do have to say that since the letter went out about 10 days ago or so, we have had a lot of folks contacting us, and we do appreciate that, with all kinds of ideas of things that they would like to see us look into. And while, again, some of those ideas are really are very interesting, we will definitely look into some of those ideas. The bottom line, though, is to find out how do you get a consistent revenue source to bridge this gap until we believe the other revenues are going to pick up. So that really, from our standpoint, was the information that the council had asked us to provide to be able to kind of set the stage for all of you here tonight to take that information, digest it. If some of you have been thinking about it, I'll turn it back over to the mayor at this point. I don't know if anyone council questions or public comment.
Does anybody have any questions on council side? Harvey? Okay, Harvey, your microphone.
Can you hear me? No. Testing.
Take the mic out of the stand.
Would you mind going over the public safety a little bit more, since the audience doesn't have this PowerPoint presentation? Actually, what?
So as far as
we kind of went through that pretty fast. What it would eliminate and how that would affect us.
Mm-hmm. So at the point of if we were to cut, if the substation were cut, that piece?
Yes, the public safety, that proposal in the next page also.
That's what we have there.
Would you go through that?
I think I'm going to hand this off over here.
Thank you. My name is Ross Cooper. For public safety, if we end up closing the substation here, it's going to increase response times because it increases the amount of times when we have either just one deputy in town, or perhaps sometimes when there'll be no deputies in town. If there's none in town, it's because they're both booking someone in the county jail or something like that. Responses to low priority calls for service, they'll just have to wait till a deputy gets back. High priority calls for service, we'll look for a deputy who's in another neighboring jurisdiction to come and handle that call, but he won't be here in town waiting for that call. It pretty much changes us to a response agency instead of being proactive, which is currently where we're at. We're pretty much going to result with 2 guys on duty 24 hours a day, and their job is to respond to calls for service. You need more than that?
Did you cover the part where that the actual patrol hours would be reduced by the increase in travel time between the city of Norco and Rupert Station?
Yeah, let me explain that. No, I didn't cover it. Essentially what happens is someone has to pay for the time that a deputy sheriff is working. The deputy sheriff's working from when he starts duty at whatever his duty assignment is. So if he's at the Rupert station, he's starting to get paid then. And the county taxpayers are not gonna pay for the time that he's driving from there to Norco. So Norco ends up having to pay for that drive time and the mileage on the car. So there's a loss of about an hour to hour and a half, maybe up to 2 hours a day for the drive time and the briefing time and the end of shift time when that deputy currently is in Norco. But under this closing the substation, that deputy will be over at the Krupa station.
I guess I kind of wanted to go line by line, but we'll just keep going forward, and we may repeat some of them. But did you talk about the one where by doing this it would eliminate the community service officers, whereas if you had to transport a prisoner to jail, that would be now done by a deputy rather than a community, so taking one more deputy off the street for that?
Yeah, that's correct. Currently, we have 2 civilian employees. We used to have 6. So we had a lot more hours of the day. We had 20 hours of the day covered with a civilian person that would handle transports of prisoners. Frequently they have to go to the county hospital or the mental health treatment facility, or they need to go to the county jail. And our goal is to keep the sworn officers on the streets here in Norco. So if we had someone who could be transported by a civilian, the deputy would hand that prisoner off, and a civilian would transport and wait with a prisoner at the hospital, typically for 5 hours while they're getting treated in the ER, and then take them to the jail and book them in. And so by having civilian employees at about half the cost of a regular deputy, you can keep the deputies on the street. This plan eliminates the last 2 of those guys and results in the deputies then doing that. They're not doing that every single day. Every deputy isn't leaving every single day with a prisoner, but when that does happen, it will be the deputy going.
So could you give us just a quick explanation of what that would mean, how many deputies we'd have on during the day shift and the night shift and the graveyard shift, kind of so in a layman's term?
Sure. We typically have 2 officers on duty on patrol in Norco at any time of the day. And that's kind of like a minimum staffing level. And that's what this plan would result in. Currently, in addition to those 2, we have 2 civilian employees that work day shift. Monday, 7 days a week is covered with those 2 employees that work from 10 in the morning till 8 in the evening, so they can handle those, both the transports and nonviolent calls for service. We currently have 2 sergeants, and they work what we call an overlapping shift, so they work from noon until 10 p.m., and so we cover 7 days a week with 1 sergeant on duty then. And that provides supervision, and there are also the 3rd unit, the 3rd sworn officer guy with a gun out there to go to some of those more hazardous calls for service. In addition to that, we have me, I'm on day shift. I typically start at 8 o'clock. So when we have our shift change, which is at, we have 1 shift coming in at 7 in the morning and 1 shift leaving at 8 in the morning. That allows me to overlap with both of those shifts and confirm that we actually have someone here who's ready to go 10-8 before we let the prior shift leave. We talked about the 2 civilians already. We have 1 office secretary who helps just kind of smooth things out and make sure paperwork gets processed at the lowest cost possible. And then we have a part-time civilian clerk who works the front lobby for us Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. until 2 in the afternoon. And they can take, that person takes in walk-in reports and things of that nature, and handles transporting paperwork back and forth from our office here in Norco to the main station over in Krupa. In addition to those staff, we have 2 deputy sheriffs that we call community-oriented policing deputies. Their job is, they work various hours. They work whenever we need them to work, essentially. So they're working different hours on different days of the week, depending on what the problem is. Frequently, those 2 officers will assist at the special events that are going on here in the city. But primarily their job is to coordinate with probation and parole, to keep track of the sex offenders that reside in our community, keep track of probationers and parolees, make sure they're abiding by their terms. Their job is to find the crime trends that are going on, and then figure out who's doing it and put an end to those trends. So when there's a problem in a specific neighborhood, we go to those 2 deputies first to try and get them to solve that. I think that's everyone. Essentially what we currently have today, we have 20 full-time paid sheriff staff About 4 years ago, we had 30 full-time paid sheriff staff. This plan, this cost-saving measure would bring us down to 14 paid staff.
So what would that put us between midnight and 8 a.m. in the morning? What kind of coverage would we have?
We would have 2 deputies on duty
We
then.
still have 2 deputies?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Beth, when you were talking about the one plan there, you're saying that the 27,000 people in Norco was the actual population and it did not include the prisoners?
Oh, it does include.
Is that,
It does include.
that's what I thought. And also, the medium income, is that a true $80-some thousand?
Yeah, that's
I was
based
under the
on.
impression that we were one of the cities that had the most poverty, a level, more of them, people dropped into the poverty level in the last few years in some of the surrounding cities. So I'm surprised that figure is that high.
Again, that's the median income for
Norco.
For Norco, it is.
Where'd I miss out at?
I do have to say, because part of that too, if you recall, we've tried to get CDBG funding for certain things, and we don't have any census tracts that would meet the requirements for some of those programs.
And the reason for the low property taxes compared to other cities, is that because and I think that to be true, because about 50-some% of our city is actually in the redevelopment area and we don't get property taxes from that.
Again, the redevelopment, eventually, when that settles through, there would be more property tax.
Right, 20 years from now.
20 years, yeah.
Okay. So there would be a lot more going into the general fund if the redevelopment
Definitely
was
have.
shut down and the debt was paid off, once the debt's paid off.
Yeah, at that point in time.
Okay. One other thing that I want to touch on just slightly in examples of balancing measures. I'm certainly not in favor of doing any more deferring of contributions to PERS or to the vehicle. I think we've been balancing the budget too long on that types of stuff. I'm certainly not at all excited about having to cut the police department any. Staff reduction and changes, we've already cut that to the bottom. The one thing I noticed that you did not mention in your proposed cuts, and maybe there's some rhyme or reason for that, but we have the 3.1 million or something for the fire department there, and our sister city across the street here, across the river, Eastville, is running their city on 1.6 million with one fire station. They have more rooftops, they have more people. I know we signed an 18-month contract with CAL FIRE, but isn't there some way that we can go to them and ask for a reduction? Because I think if with the Eastville Fire Station there and CAL FIRE and the other question I'm going to throw at you, we have the fire station down here close to the Target Center that I believe is only open during the fire season. Is that right, Chief?
That is correct.
And so we would have protection over there from that fire station, Eastville Fire Station, and one of our stations. And then I think this CAL FIRE has something called an Amador plan where that during the 6 or 7 months that this station down here was open under the fire season, that we would have the same coverage as we have now. And if we had to, we could pay them for the other 4 or 5 months and reduce our fire services quite extensively. So is that something we might be interested in looking at?
I think, again, those are all policy service level decisions that, again, the council would need to provide some direction if those are options that you wanted to look at. The examples that we gave were just to give a sense of what things cost and what this level of cut could impact. Again, these are not, when you get into your budget workshop, that is where those types of decisions would need to be made as to what we would implement. I think at this point, if there were anything specific on the information we provided, I think that we kind of have the public comment, and then maybe you'll have another round of discussion at the end. Maybe you'll have a little more discussion on some of those. But right now, those would be policy decisions.
Okay, a couple more. I just wanted the public to be aware that we do have other places we can cut. So they're a big partner of ours, and they need to kind of help us make that decision where they want to see cut. You talked about 1.8 million in reserves and 1.4 in a special asset fund, so those two together is about 3.2. Is that correct? We have both of those.
You do have both of those.
And so that's what we really need to keep without touching, to have everyday cash flow to do the everyday businesses.
Well, I think as Andy had said, the 1.8 is what we do count on to balance our cash flows throughout the year. And the 1.4.
We've been able to make it every time this year so far.
Well, we were down to what? It was really close in December.
So it'd be better if we had that other 1.4 there that we could use if we had to.
Well, again, the 1.4 will take a policy decision. Right now, we wouldn't be able to use that for cash flow. That is, the city council set that up, that needs a 4/5 vote of the city council to spend.
Okay, all right, that's all I got for right now, thank you.
Herb?
I want to hear what the citizens have to say before I say anything.
Kathy, anything?
Yeah, I just have a couple questions. I'm wondering I guess this question might be for you, Brian. Where it says charges for services, that line item there in the revenue to the city, does that include the money that we generate from the Ingalls Event Center?
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
And are we projecting, I know you and I have talked and there's a lot of additional things coming this year. Will we be showing those projections a little higher in this next fiscal year?
That's based on our status quo.
Based on our status quo, when we move into the budget workshops, then we have some projections that we want to present to you. So the answer would be yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And then my next question is, when you get to the end, Beth, where you talk about trying to meet the $1.3 million shortfall, you talk about reducing staff, and at this level, I just can't imagine so much of the work is done by part-timers, and then there's just really the directors, and there's just really, is there any talk of what staff we would, how we would downsize through staff reductions and what the impact to the residents would be?
Again, those would be brought forward in a budget workshop as recommendations. And then the impacts are sort of the things that we have summarized up here. These are not all of them, but just to give you an idea with some of the, again, we'd have to restructure the way we provide services. So there would be less hours to provide the services in. We provide services, so that's where the costs are. You cut people, it impacts the level of services.
I guess I'm just thinking about the counters. We would have like only one person on the counters, so it would close the counter, it seems like, in a lot of those areas.
Berwin?
Yeah, I had the same questions on the sheriff's department as Harvey did. Thanks for the answers there, Ross. But Brian, on the parks program, now we had talked earlier this last year about closing a neighborhood park, and then we talked later about the disadvantages of it because it cost a lot of money to fence it off. Somebody still has to mow it every once in a while because the weeds will grow up in it and everything. How much does it cost to close one of them and fence it off and
That would vary from park to park and how many acres there is there. Looking at some of the scenarios that are proposed to you here and some of the reductions here, this would eliminate, based on these cuts, would eliminate all of the medians in the city of Norco. And all living trees, plant material will be removed, and non-living material would be replaced in those medians. It would also include the closure of 2 neighborhood parks, both each about a ½ acre in size, and those are what would be proposed out of the park system. So to close it, it depends on, I think last year when we were looking at those different scenarios, Berwin, I think we were looking at what the closure of one park when you had another ongoing cost of about $14,000, I think it was. It just didn't make sense. when you look at our square footage price for maintenance right now is a very good price. To ever reestablish those facilities in the future, it'll probably cost 10 times whatever the cost is now, if not more. Because you basically, when you shut a facility down and you fence that off, you're removing all of the irrigation, all of the heads, all of the various service that goes to those facilities, which includes a whole number of specifications that we require. Once you remove that, the park then at some point becomes unsafe unless you remove that usage from the public. If the public goes onto an unmaintained facility, then we accept liability and risk to that.
Right, so that's why you'd fence it off.
That's correct.
Would you remove the playground equipment and stuff like that out of there?
Possibly not. If it's fenced off, it's no trespassing. Those are things we'll have to make decisions with risk management, but that could be a possibility.
Right, all right, another thing, the response to emergency calls for animal control services will not be responded to on certain days. Now, I know we're talking mainly the small animals, like, is that what you're talking about?
No. In this scenario, on those days that we would close, there would be no standby service. So what would happen on those particular days, if you called after hours or emergency services, you would not get a response at all. The response would have to go to the sheriff's department, and then they would, if they have time, take that call, and they would then need to respond to it whatever appropriately would be. So we would not be returning any calls. However, loose livestock and those type of things, we would probably work with sheriffs and fire and use NARD to assist us with those particular activities when it deals with loose livestock, large livestock.
Right. One of the things I was getting at, and I don't know how many of these type calls you get. I know you get complaints every once in a while. Is about animal abuse. Would that be a sheriff's call? The sheriff would have to come out on a deal like that?
If we don't have an officer on duty on at least standby at that point in time, we would not respond to those calls. So there would be no officer. It would just follow up to the next backup, which would be probably RSO at that point in time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, please.
I'm sorry, I have one more question. I guess this would probably be for you, Bill. Thinking about, Beth mentioning that we do have that special asset revenue fund, and I know being on council back in those years, we're thinking really about CIP projects and just how old our plumbing is. I know we've had a lot of leaks this last winter. I know we fixed one. You told me you fixed the Band-Aid on one and it makes another one pop. I think before we could really consider using that, I'd like a little update from you on just how good our system is. And I know it's getting kind of antiquated. Do you think it could make it through the next few years, or do you think that would not be a good idea for us to use up those funds?
Well, I think that's a policy decision again. I think Beth has alluded to that. The system is fairly solid, and we do have revenues that council's made a decision to increase the water rates and sewer rates to set aside the infrastructure money that we're talking about that is almost a mirror image in the general fund, which is non-existent, but in the water and sewer fund it does exist. We also, as new development comes in, we will be receiving development impact fees for water and sewer that also contribute to rehabilitating the water and sewer system. The asset fund was set aside because it initially was water and sewer revenues, from where we sold properties or that were in the water fund, and the intention was to use that as a policy decision, but not necessarily for infrastructure. It could have been for anything. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. And then I just wanted to comment too that Eastville, if I'm correct, is about 10 square miles. It's 4 square miles smaller than Norco, and I just, why I don't want to reduce police staffing, I certainly am not prepared to, would be a last resort for me to reduce our fire department. It seems like those We just had a paramedic call up at Ingalls Park for the Horse Week events, and I think with the amount of square miles that we have, we really need to think twice about not having our 2 stations.
Just a couple of questions. So Andy, part of our problem in terms of just the property tax revenues that we receive is really has more to do not so much with redevelopment, but the fact that we have half-acre properties and larger, correct?
I think that's certainly part of it. If you look at the demographic information we shared with you earlier, you can see that cities of similar size have more housing units, and therefore they do tend to generate more property tax revenues.
And many of them were also utilize redevelopment in large expanses of their city and things like that. So in essence, it really has more to do with the fact that we chose 48 years ago to live on large properties. Is that correct, you think? I mean, for years we've had to find ways to sort of overcome the low property tax revenues that we receive.
That's correct.
If we change the police contract, maybe this is for Ross. Right now I understand because we were the first contract city. I understand that we enjoy some benefits that we would not enjoy if we change the contract. But we get something because we've been with you so long. Can you elaborate on that, or am I incorrect, or?
Essentially what happened is we grew into a substation here incrementally, and there's no other substation in the county that has some of the benefits. Like the 2 sergeants that are out here are really not paid for separately. They're paid for to support, they're really when you pay for a deputy sheriff, you pay for the support that comes with him. And the way in which we grew over the years incrementally caused the department to need to put supervision out here, because we're not going to put officers out without supervision. And so we ended up in this unique situation that we are today, where I think Norco has a significant benefit from those 2 sergeants who are out in the field. They're the 3rd deputy out on the scene on some of the more dangerous calls for service. And once that's gone, I think to try and recreate this, we're going to be in a position where we'll need to pay for them again. Several years ago, Norco paid for one of those sergeants individually, and then when amending the contract, essentially worked out an agreement to pay for another deputy instead of the sergeant and get to keep the sergeant here.
Thank you.
Very hard to recreate.
In terms of and I think Kathy began to allude to this, in terms of the fire department, one of the issues that we have in terms of our coverage is the fact that we have large properties, hills, hillsides, river. We have a lot of things that Eastvale and some of the other flat cities don't have. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, that is correct.
And that's one of the reasons why it costs a little bit more to, would it also be a correct statement to say that since we've shifted over to CAL FIRE, we actually maybe, especially in a disaster, because we have so many CAL firemen living in the area, that we may be better protected in an earthquake or a severe situation?
There's no doubt that there are more CAL FIRE folks that live in Norco than you did with your staffing with your own fire department. Some of those employees may have their own responsibilities to go back to their other home stations that, depending upon the size of the incident, yes, they would be.
There's now a system in place. If they can't get to their home station, then they come to one of our stations, and they work in a unified statewide system.
Correct.
Okay. I think that's all I had. So I guess if nobody else on council has any comments, I think we'll open this up to public comment. Do we have a timer? We gotta watch. You know what? I probably won't be as strict as I should be, but I'll be pretty strict if somebody wants to get that. What I want is for everybody to have the opportunity to speak, and I think council, I know them all pretty well. They want to hear from you. So what you would do is you would come up. Do we have cards or sign-up sheet?
We have cards, but we could just put a sign up.
Yeah, that would be great. We'll make it sort of casual and formal. All right, so if you'd like to speak, why don't you come up to the front row and have a seat, and then if you change your mind, you can still come up. Who would like to be first?
I'll go.
And he needs a microphone.
Yeah, microphone.
Oh, okay, got it.
I'll try and keep it quick.
Good evening.
Good evening, Ellis Chernoff. I live over on Viceroy in the northeast corner of the town. I've been here for 17 years, so I've been here a while, like some of you guys. I know some of you people. I'll try and keep it within the time frame. 2005, 2006, we probably did pretty well because we had all these developers came in and built some expensive homes, and we expected to have property tax revenues commensurate with those properties. Unfortunately, we've lost that because a lot of them have gone into foreclosure. The difference between our town and East Vale and Temecula is they have property densities and much newer homes that people pay more money for, and they're paying more taxes for. The other thing is those two communities have much more retail than we do. We counted very much on retail from an auto mall, and along with the downturn in 2008, we lost the auto mall, basically. So we don't have that much in terms of retail services, and we've lost a lot of property tax. The people that live here, we have $313,000 median home prices. However, a large percentage of people that are not in foreclosure are people who have been here for a long time, and they paid a lot less than that for their homes, and therefore their property tax is commensurate with that. I appreciate the detailed presentation you made, the breakdown, and of course the options that we have. It's very possible that we might have to consider general obligation bonds as a way to bolster the short-term shortfall, because otherwise we're talking about a huge change in tax rates here, and that would depress people moving here, and it would depress businesses from coming here. So it is a difficult problem. I'm concerned about the law enforcement and the fire and safety services here. We don't want to have a situation like Sanford, Florida, where we bolster our law enforcement shortfall by having community services with amateurs. So we don't want to have that. So that's all the time I have. That's all I'm going to say at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Someone else? Roy, you're on deck. All right. It wouldn't be right without you.
I'm sorry.
No, you're great.
Good evening, Council.
Good evening, Bert.
In your mission statement, I think not the mission statement, but the other one, there's nothing ever mentioned about infrastructure. And you know as well as I do, the public works guys are putting out fires all the time. That's all they do, put out fires. So you can't really look at cutting anything in the public works department or the infrastructure. Those are things that, as much a service as fire and police. In fact, as far as I can see, maybe even more so. Without those, you don't have a city. I mean, you can close a fire station, you can still survive. You take public works out of the work, you don't survive anymore. Your sewer, your water, those are things that the city has to maintain at all costs. Your street situation has gone from bad to worse. It just gets worse year by year. Because for years, we never put any money in the infrastructure for streets. And we're still not doing that. Somewhere along the line, we're going to have to come to grips about our streets, our water, and our sewer. Those are things that, as a council, need to put as much consideration into those items as you do fire and police. Thank you.
Thank you, Vern. Roy. By the way, Vern is a Streets and Trails Commissioner.
Hello, I would like to just recommend or ask that you guys really look at that special asset fund. If I heard correctly, it was $1.4 million, and if our deficit's going to be $1.3 million, it seems like a no-brainer to take that money out, and at least we're fixed this year. Property taxes, if you're looking towards property taxes, I think that'll be a real tough sell to do this year. I know folks in my neighborhood would not be happy with that. They're already paying a lot of taxes. The other thing is, The street medians, please do not take the vegetation out of the street medians. Hamner Avenue in sections looks terrible anyhow. If you pull those trees out of Hamner Avenue and some of that landscaping that we do have down there, no businesses are going to come here. We have to also look at recruiting the businesses to come here. We have to look nice too. We can't be closing the park on Hamner. If you do that, again, you're sending the wrong message to businesses moving in. So again, take a look at that special asset fund, 1.4 million, to balance the 1.3 million deficit that we will face next year. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Well, most people know me. Haven't had a lot of people come up yet and make suggestions, but I'm going to make a couple of them. First off, the first one people are going to hate me saying, but I'm going to say it anyways. If we love this town the way we love it, and we all want to be here, if we have to bring a tax in for a couple of years, let's look at that. I will say, being a contractor here in town, if we start shutting down City Hall and make it worse than what it already is, and I don't mean worse in the way that it's, you know, that we're not any different than anybody else, you're not going to get developers coming in here. You're not going to get the people in here to do the building, because if they can't get a hold of somebody and talk to somebody and get plans and permits in a fairly timely manner, they're not going to come here. I don't care how much you can prod them and ask them to come, they're not going to come here. That's what I do for a living, and it already is a pain in the butt in every city that I have to deal with. It's already as bad as it can get. You cut that department out and you cut the city out, you guys all know it's going to be catastrophic. You know, I don't like a tax, but that could be it. Another thought was, we're talking about the substation. Well, I don't know if like a Harupa Valley or Eastville has one. Well, why couldn't we possibly share ours with them and charge them for using our substation? Which would that not defer some of the cost? You know, I mean, there are just other thoughts in doing things. I don't want to lose our sheriffs. I definitely don't want to lose our fire department. We saw, like Kathy said, up at Ingalls this weekend, a gal got hurt. They were there. You know, this is our town. This isn't anybody else's town but ours. This is Norco. I've been here for 12 years now. I never thought I'd ever get involved in a city, and I got in. And you people know I do what I got to do to be part of this town. This is my town, this is our town. I think we need to buckle it up, figure out what we're going to do, jump on the horse that we ride on. If we have to pay a little bit more money, we got to do it, period. And if the people can't handle it, you know, I lost everything I got, and my business is still here. And I know people don't like what I got to say, but if we have to, you know, spend a little bit of money on taxes for a couple of years, we got to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person. Good evening.
Rob Swindell. Hi. If I were to go to a financial advisor and say that I was in the predicament that the city is in, the first thing they would ask me is, what are my assets? So I ask you, what are our assets? Can we sell Silver Lakes? Can we sell Ingalls Park? You know, can you generate revenue from some assets we have that really aren't making money for the city? Another thing, I hope that more people in this room are appalled, I guess would be the word, at the abuse of the RDA. The city should not have been dependent on that. That's ridiculous. And if, for those that don't know, that wasn't free money, those are bonds. That means that we're borrowing that money and kicking the can down the road so we can pay it back with interest. Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, I'm glad that's gone, and this should be a self-sufficient city. The next thing, I didn't notice anything in the budget as far as the outgoing for covering pending litigation judgments. It seems to me that that there should be something in the budget as far as that is concerned. And on that note, I would just generally say that, you know, the city should stop acting haphazardly in areas that would lead to litigation. You know, I think some of the behavior of maybe previous council members or current council members, is open the city to litigation. And I think that kind of behavior needs to stop. If we're, in a glass house, we shouldn't be throwing stones, right? Trail maintenance costs. I know I pay personally about $800 a year for the maintenance of the trails around my house. I don't actually have a trail on my street, but I still pay that money. So what about the rest of Norco? Who's paying to maintain those trails? How much does that money cost? The recent Chevron Energy report, in part of their justification for that plan, they said there were 17,000 horses in Norco. If you charged $100 per horse, just to register a horse, that'd be $1.7 million per year. And that's just double what I pay to register my dog. Why don't people pay the way? If you want to play, pay to play. Pay for the park, pay for the trails, pay for the horses. This Horsetown USA thing, let's make it that's fine, that's great, but you gotta pay to play. Okay, and if that's what it takes, we heard people say, hey, we're willing to pay taxes. Well, pay for the services that you're using. If you're using the trails, pay for it. Using the park, pay for it. That's all I was.
Thank you, Sue. Next person. Anyone else? Going. Greg.
Come on. I appreciate what council and staff's doing tonight, but I just have two questions. On the pie chart, you showed 6 cents out of every dollar that goes to Measure A funds. How much of that comes back in Measure A funds? How many cents out of it? 6 cents come back? Yeah, and my second question, Andy, is on the RDA, you have a $150,000 placeholder, and on the oversight board, I thought that allowance was $250,000 that we're allowed by the state. So why the 150 if we're going to get it at all? Those two questions.
Thanks, Greg. Anyone else? Good evening.
My name is Janine Adams. I'm Park and Recs Commissioner. Not as involved recently as I typically like to be. I expect that to change in a few weeks. I don't have a whole lot to say other than the fact that anything that has to be done is going to be a tough sell, because up to this point, our budget has been dissected, first with large equipment, and I think we're down with such fine little tweezers pulling out every last little bit of essential things that we're down to the real vital need. And I agree with Bob Leonard to the extent that we've had a pretty nice ride up to this point. I mean, I'm a relative newcomer to Norco. I've only been here about 14 years, but it's been nice that we've had the benefit of the things that we've had. But maybe we need to kind of step up and be willing to carry a little bigger share for the things that we value and love. I think the city has done a phenomenal job. We have some really great staff. We have people who care deeply about the things that I believe are most precious around here. And I know from talking to my friends and neighbors, people that aren't maybe quite as involved, that they just still don't really understand how dire the situation is, because staff has done such a remarkable job of making everything look okay, in spite of the fact that it's been really difficult. People don't realize that we've got a small percentage of city staff doing the job of 2 or 3 times the people that used to do it. I know that some of the people I have worked most closely with in Parks and Rec and admire deeply take very seriously the things that they're trying to preserve. I don't know how they sleep at night sometimes with the burdens and the concerns that they're carrying and that they're struggling with. You guys are in an unenviable position right now. you don't have a lot of really great options. And because the problems have been masked by the really hard work and dedication and innovation of really great people, we have a community that has been able to live largely unaware of just how difficult things are. And, you know, that's part of what I refer to when I say you're in an enviable position. I think there's a lot of teaching that has to be done for people to understand. You know, I, like Roy, hope that it doesn't come down to cutting down trees and medians. That's a pretty huge hit on our quality of life. I have full confidence in you guys. I think that you'll take a hard look at this and do what you need to do. But I think everybody in this room who really cares about what we have and what we want to preserve has a responsibility to try to make people aware of just where we are and how difficult these choices are. And if we have to individually shoulder a little bit greater financial burden, maybe that's what it has to be. And I understand financial hard times. I'm living through some of that myself. You know, I haven't had my irrigation on for about 6 months, and parts of my yard are showing that, but I don't have the money for it right now. But, you know, we're in this together, and we need to get through this together. And I appreciate the people that have been here tonight that have had positive, constructive suggestions. Coincidentally, the people that had the most positive things to say are also the people who show up and volunteer and help move forward the things that make this community what it is. And those are the people, and those are the suggestions that you ought to be paying the most attention to. The people that are part of the solution as often as they can be, are the people whose hearts are in the right place. And, you know, all of you guys meet that definition as well. So, anyway, you have my support and my best wishes as you figure this out. And thanks for everything you've already done, and thanks to our staff.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, going, gone. Bring it back to council. Thank you very much for your comments. Kathy, why don't we start at your end? Do you have something to say? Or?
I guess I just want to say that Janine makes me think of the little analogy that I say a lot, and that is that when people first think about Norco, they think it's the horses, but truly it's the people in Norco that make it so special. I don't know of a town that's 5 times our size that doesn't have the amazing community events that we have all year round. We just finished 10 days of Horse Week that was phenomenal. Berwin and I were at the Day of the Cowboy meeting today. We've got a new Oktoberfest in the making, and we've got the Norco Valley Fair. I think a big portion of those folks that volunteer their time for that are here. I look around, I see members of Hall of Fame, I see members of Rural and Horse, NHA, how do I stutter on that one? And it's just truly all of us, the people that make Norco so special, and the lifestyle that brought us here together. I know that we have a shiny, shiny future. I know we're all tired of hearing about Silver Lakes, but if you go out there now, you can see it is coming to fruition. The tractors are working 7 days a week, preparing for a soccer tournament that's going to have 500 teams just this September. I just don't know where we're even going to house all those folks, and if we've even got enough gas stations. I just visualize them all in line buying gas here in Norco and shopping and eating at our restaurants. But in the meantime, it's true, we've got a problem. We do have a problem over the next few years. I think that, we talk about a tax. I mean, I don't want a tax either. I don't want to have to do that. I worry about taking the special asset fund and having absolutely no reserves. We don't like to do that in our families if we don't have to just be sitting so bare. So that's definitely a worry. I think that, I know that I just want to make sure everyone's aware that there's no way we can even tax you. That would be a vote of the people. That would be our decision as a team, as a city, if we decided we wanted to do that to help preserve our lifestyle. But I just wanted to jump on the campaign trail of what Bob said about the counters, and knowing that we have to think about promoting ourselves in economic development, and we absolutely need to have the best service possible to promote our business, our city, and this economic boom that is going to be happening in the next couple of years. Kevin and I met along with Ross and Jeff, our fire and police chief, with the prison. And I know I just wanted to give everybody an update on that. We met, and you probably all read in the paper that the prison is closing. A lot of people say that's, we've heard that a lot through the years. I've lived in Norco over 40 years, and we really got from the higher reps today that it's really moving ahead with that plan. And I'm already getting phone calls. I got 2 over the weekend with developers ready to come in and make that truly the mission in of Norco. So we do have a great future in front of us, and but I really am hoping that all of you will think about seriously what you want us to do, and continue to call me and email me with suggestions and talk about what you think is best. If we think we want to try a tax on the ballot just to see what the people think, or are we ready to make the kind of cuts that will really impair our economic development and our Park and Recs department? Do we want to cut fire and police? I really don't think so. Do we want to cut ourselves till we have no reserves? That's another scary thought. So keep talking to me, and I'm ready to hear from my colleagues.
Berwin?
Yeah, I want to thank everybody that got up and spoke tonight. I wish more people was here to throw out more ideas to us. I'm upset that we might lose our sheriff's department. I'm a strong believer in public safety, and I just don't see any way that I could ever support closing one of the fire stations. I know most of their runs every week is medical emergencies, but still it's nice to know that we have them here. And I don't see how we could cut staff anymore, or workers. That's why I was asking Brian about the parks, how much that would save us. And I don't know about the medians and everything. I can't imagine seeing those without trees and a lot of dead weeds and stuff growing in it. I know the city's doing all it can with some volunteer groups in town to help out doing some of the work. There's 7 that help parks out by working the arenas and different places that they send us, but we just need to figure out how we can get more businesses into town. I'd like to see 2 or 3 more hotels, but like Beth said, that's a couple of years down the road before they start bringing us in any income. So I don't know, maybe some of the other residents in town will come forward with some ideas. And I too don't really believe in taxes, but I know a lot of people can't afford it. It would be a strain on us, my household, if we had to pay a tax. But I think if we were going to save the city, we'd all have to think seriously about putting it on the ballot. Thank you.
Herb?
You know, when we were talking about the budgets early on, as a council, we were, I guess the best place to start is we did a priority list of what we thought we could cut based on a scale of 1 to 10, and I guess the consensus was there wasn't a consensus, and that's a good thing, because ultimately that's what you hope any council or any commission or any group of citizens that you put in a room are going to have such a diverse amount of information and knowledge that what'll come out of that will be a benefit to everybody. And that was the purpose of this first of maybe 1 or 2. And Beth's shaking her head. I compliment staff. I always do. They did an outstanding job of presenting where we're at. Now, the next part is, where do we want to go with that? We've looked at a bunch of options. You know, I can say that, you know, I'm a right sizer, and that's a term that nothing more than a headhunter. As you go in and eliminate fluff, extra positions, and you get down to the bottom dollar on how much the company is making. That's what I did for 25 years. And I'm really good at it. And I can look and see by a flow chart, which the city didn't have for many years, and I never asked for one when I was on the council for 8 years before, but that was a different time. We had a lot of money. There was a lot of sales tax. Everything was flowing good. We had reserves that were going sky high. The 1.4 million was set up as an extra fluff fund in case something come up and we didn't want to use the reserve fund. We could go ahead and use that. And Andy knows because he was here when we started that with Jeff Allred. And the fact is that was a fluff fund. Something breaks, we've got an extra reserve besides that. Now, do I want a tax? No. Would I vote for a tax? No. To me, a tax is when you come to me with a tax, what you're telling me is in all of the minds that we've got in staff and on council, we have depleted every avenue, every junction, every flowchart position, and there is nothing left. Then you reach for a tax, and then you do a termination of the tax when you implement it. Do I agree with one? No, I don't agree with one. I can set and go down a list of things that I could have asked questions about earlier, that I will ask now. Does anybody know how much land we're supposed to have for the size of the city based on the Quimby Act? That's the amount of parks and recreational land that we've got. How many acres do we have based on the livable population that we've got? Take a look. I mean, that's a question that I'm asking you because I know the answer, but it does no good for me to tell you. But if you go research it and you find out that we've got double the amount of acreage for parks, then are we spending $1.6 million for things that we really need, that we're supposed to have? And the answer is, it's up to you. When you start paying taxes, thinking about it. Next question is, when you look at staff, you look to see, I do, you look to see what the department head is doing. How many people does that person supervise? What the classification is, what the benefits of it. Does that person justify supervising one or two people and another department head supervises nobody? So have we reached the limit with staff? No, we haven't reached the limit with staff yet. And I just made a first blush at that flow chart. Looking at it, thinking, I heard people say taxes. Well, taxes are fine when you reach the point of no return. We're not there. It's time to think, let's right size what we've got. We've got a lifestyle that nobody's got. Nobody. It has sustained itself based on the roof tax that we've got right now in place. What happened was we forgot that we weren't spending our money. We always thought we were spending somebody else's money and it would never come back and haunt us. Same problem with the state, same thing with the federal government. The fact is, I'm sorry, but you balance your checkbook just exactly like you do at home, and I said that in 02, 03, 04, 05, 06, and 07. You don't balance a budget by bringing funds in from another department when the revenue is less than what the expenses are. I don't care. But the fact is, there's other things that we can do before we get to the point of taxes. Yes, there's always that obligation bonds that the gentleman talked about, absolutely. But I think there's other areas that we can look at before we get to that. And I've got probably another 15 or 20 minutes, and I don't want to belabor it. I'll give Councilman Sullivan an opportunity. But I compliment you for coming, and I compliment staff. Thank you.
Hey, I was enjoying it. You were keeping me off the mic for a while. I appreciate that. Thank you. And also, you had some great things to say, Herb, and I agree with a lot of them. I want to ask one question about a little misnomer here I think is going on. We talk about the number of rooftops we have in Norco and about how we don't have the high density and how the property tax of Eastvale and some of these other cities is much greater because of their high density. But when I look at this chart that you gave us here tonight, if you look at all of those cities, the existing home medium price, Norco just about doubles all of them except 1, 2, 3. And we have 7,322 of them. San Jacinto has 14,000. Pierce has 17,000. The other one, Cathedral City has 20,000. Beaumont 12, and 12. So we have half as much as they do, yet our medium income of our house is twice as much. So how can we say that our property taxes aren't the same as those cities? So maybe at the next meeting, could we have a little chart that would kind of break that and show what that would be? Because they're all assessed the same, right?
One thing to keep in mind though is the median price of a house as listed here is not necessarily the tax basis. Okay. If you have your house currently worth $500,000 and perhaps you bought that house and paid $200,000 some time ago, because of Prop 13, the county assessor is not actually charging you tax based on that market value of that property. There is some not to exceed 2%, I believe, annual allowance that is factored in, but the median price is not the determinant of how much tax you collect. But yeah, you're right. It does have an impact. That the fact of the matter that properties in Norco are probably worth more than properties in Paris. But again, it all depends on when those properties were bought, what is their cost basis, what the county values those property versus their market value. So if you're in a place where properties didn't go as quite high as, I know Norco, for example, at one point, properties here did go very high. And you're not paying taxes on that basis. You're paying it at what it costs you plus the allowance that the county assessor is allowed to assess.
I understand what you're saying, but there's a lot of people that bought their houses in the last year. There's a lot of people that bought their houses in the last 15 years, the last 20 years that don't come under, not too many of them come under Proposition 13 anymore. The particular, is that?
Everybody's under We're all under Prop 13. Whatever you bought your house in sets your property tax.
I'm talking about pre-1978 when they were very, very low. I'm talking about, yeah, you're still under Proposition 13 as far as the amount of percentage of tax they can charge you. But not many of us still have that house that we bought pre-1978. That's what I'm talking about, not under that particularly act that was passed at that time. Whereas, fast forward, I paid $222,000 for my house and it's assessed at $500 and something thousand. So I'm paying a lot more than I should be paying. I have another house here that I paid $535,000 for that I'm assessed at $350,000 on because it was bought at a different time. So I think that I have a valid point there that almost all of them, we doubled the price of the homes, and we don't have that much more than twice, they don't have much more than twice the homes that we have. So I think that's kind of a misnomer of blaming it on property taxes. Run down a couple other things. The 1.4 million we have in the special asset fund, I don't really, as somebody brought up tonight, I'm not really wild about using that to balance the budget. We need to start living within our means. We need to freeze our expenditures at whatever we need to freeze them at and live within our the amount of revenue we got coming in. I think we need to still need to keep the 1.8 million in reserves and not even think about using them for general fund expenditure. And one of the speakers tonight brought up that we haven't budgeted any money for future lawsuits, like the firefighters have a lawsuit against us, Mavericks has a lawsuit against us, there's more potential lawsuits, so we haven't budgeted any money, and I think probably we at least should start putting away some money for those types of things. As far as a tax on the other people, no, I wouldn't vote to put a tax on the people either. That's not my responsibility. Now, however, I would vote to put it on a ballot to allow them to vote themselves for a special tax. Would I do it this year? It would be, I think it would be fruitless, because during a presidential election, you're going to have so many people coming out, and I think it takes 66% of the people to pass something like that. So if you put a tax initiative on the ballot this year, I first raised this question back in 2008 when the city council at that time had Rita Lauer come in and talk to them about it. And there was a lot of questions that asked about how they could generate more revenue, and this was brought up at that particular time. And if we put, if everybody would just vote to put $20 on each rooftop in Norco, that would raise over $1.6 million a year. And I'm here to tell you that we're probably not going to get through this without that. And I'm also here to tell you that if you put it on the ballot this year in a presidential election, it'll go right there. So, yes, I would vote to put it on the ballot, but not this year. We don't have the money right now because in the RDA we had some money in there to finish English Park. That's been taken away. So we can't rely on a lot of revenue coming from there. We may even have to close or reduce the operating hours up there. We've gone from 400 business licenses in 2010 to under 200 today in the city. We must have development in order to get out of this physical disaster that we're in. And we've had some good projects come to us here lately in the last few years. And this city council, planning commission, and a lot of you folks in the audience and a lot of folks in the city have spoke against those projects. They didn't want them. You know, you have to have development to keep the city going. There's no such thing as staying the same. You either get better or you get worse. And so I think that, and also in the budget, Andy had in there about $400,000, I believe it was, for the next 2011 to 12 to 15 budget, about 300 homes each year that was going to be built is now going to be taken out. It was in the future budgets, future revenue predictions. So none of that's going to happen.
No, I don't think we've included any revenues in the general fund for future
There was any capital improvements that showed
it,
that money was coming in, which would have been used.
That's correct. That would be for capital improvement,
right?
Under development impact fees. Okay. But you know very well that I would say over the last 4 years or so, we've barely collected anything from development impact fees. Right. So it's simply not there.
You know, we've had opportunities in the past with the. I'm sad to say that. We've talked about bringing in large retail stores, and some of the council and the people don't want big box stores in this town, and they say that mom and pops are the staple of this town, and we need more of those. And but the mom and pops aren't paying the bills. You know, we're gonna have to bring in some large retails into this city in order to, raise our sales tax base. Silver Lake's, is only paying about $30-something thousand a month, I think $396,000 a year. That's not going to make a big dent in our budget. The expected people that they're to bring here in their first year, second year, and third year is all fantastic if we can get them to come over to Norco to spend some money. I don't think that that's going to occur right away to see an increase in our revenues from that. The potential closing of the prison that Kathy talked about a little bit there. Most of us won't live long enough to see anything happen on that property there. It's not going to be something that happens overnight. The state's not going to just give it to cities like they have in the past. They'll probably sell it to the highest developer. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of toxic cleanup there. It may take like Wally Labs now. The gentleman said the other night that it could be another 15 to 20 years. You know, he didn't want to make a prediction how long it could be, but it could be a long time before that. So we could be looking at 15 to 20 years before the prison could be cleaned up. So I don't think we should even think about looking at that as any type of revenue. And I don't believe there's any entity out there that would loan any money for funding to build anything on it right now until it was cleaned up. We're absolutely broke at this particular time, and you know, one of the things is when you go broke, one of the possibilities is going back to the county. And I'm certain, for one, I do